Doug just pulled up.
Perfect. All right, so. Oh, shoot, this one wrong.
Yep. You get to answer all the questions.
Okay.
Nice shirt.
Like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll try that.
I'll step out and listen up for two.
All right, boss, you're in charge.
I'm in charge?
Again. That's way nice shirt. Oh, we have handouts tonight?
It's definitions.
Thank you.
So, with people doing it online, do they come on Sunday?
Some of them can, so you can leave them here.
So, yeah, we'll do that.
Yep.
Am I,
You're up.
I'm up?
You're up.
I'm up, I'm up.
You're live.
We're live?
You're live. It's not Memorex.
Live and in person.
Live and in person, okay.
I'm gonna go outside and check the.
We have a smaller group here in person, so we're going to have hopefully people online watching tonight. The road to the Constitution. It's about time we read the owner's manual. This is a fun cartoon I put in, I found on the internet. We're getting ready to go over the edge. And if you notice on the ship, it's the USS Constitution. And I think it's time we read the owner's manual for our government. Oh, I gotta get a copy here of the Constitution. If you look at your Constitution, well, these ones don't have it. Oh yeah, here we are. On the front of the Constitution, you'll see a picture of George Washington, and he's at the desk where he's just signed the Constitution. And he has a feather in his hand. That's what they used for a pen at the time. And if you notice, there's a little inkwell there that he can dip from. And if you flip to the back of your Constitution, you'll have the thing that says, "With the original signers, I, as one of we the people of the United States, affirm that I have read or will read our U.S. Constitution and pledge to maintain and promote its standard of liberty for myself and for my posterity, and do hereby attest to that by my signature." And you have a spot to sign right above George Washington's signature as a witness. So when I give people the Constitution, I like to ask them to sign that they will read it. As we go through the class, through these next 9 weeks, we will go through each and every word of the Constitution. We'll have read it and learned all about it. George Washington, when he, or this is the oath, I guess, of the president, when they take the president. "I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." Added to that, some people have taken the military oath. And in the military oath, what is added to that?
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Okay. I took that oath in 2012, not as a member of the military, but in order to become a U.S. citizen. Last week we talked a little bit about history, and I knew there was something I was forgetting to bring tonight. Anyways, if you go into colleges and universities, or anybody that's teaching about the Constitution or U.S. history, the first thing they teach you about is the Federalist Papers. Right? Everybody's heard of the Federalist Papers.
Yeah.
That's, Madison is writing all about, well, this is what's in the Constitution, this is why we need to have it. And the Federalist Papers was to promote ratifying the Constitution. It was written after the the convention was signed, and to go out and promote so that the states would ratify the Constitution. So we've all heard about the Federalist Papers. How many have heard of the Anti-Federalist Papers?
I'm cheating.
You're cheating because you've been here before?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's interesting about the Anti-Federalist Papers is it has the debates in there from the Constitution, and it has letters by the farmer and things saying why we don't want the Constitution ratified. Now, why in the world would people not want to have the Constitution ratified?
Because they liked it the way it was, probably.
Okay? They said the federal government is too strong. They're worried that the president's going to become too powerful, that Congress is going to tell the states what to do. In a sense, they saw what's happening today.
Prophetic.
And so they were arguing against it. One of the chief writers on there was Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry we know as a patriot. He fought, Revolutionary War. We need to go out. He's given the speeches to get us going, and in Virginia especially, to get the Virginians ready to go up and help those in Massachusetts. And so he's speaking against the Constitution. That kind of sounds weird. But he saw what could happen if people weren't a moral and religious people with the Constitution. They would wring out of it whatever they could. So we'll go over the political spectrum again of the founders to understand what they thought of with regards to government. So we have left and right, ruler's law and no law, tyrannies under ruler's law, anarchy under no law. So we have anarchists today. We think of anarchists as, we just want to rule the world by tyranny. Anarchy in its true form is no law, every man is left to himself. Not to go around and create chaos. So it's kind of been turned to today. We have, when you hear of anarchy, it's roving bands and marauders going through and just putting down the weak. But there they had no law, meaning they just wanted to do whatever they wanted to do and have no one tell them what to do. People's law in the middle, that would be the Constitution. Not overpowering and telling you everything to do, not no law, but a balanced center. Federal government, according to the founders, was supposed to be the last resort. You're supposed to go to local and then state, and federal is the last resort on any problems. We the people, or the Constitution being in the middle. Again, if you want to know the meaning of a word, go to a dictionary. And if you want to go to the best dictionary, the closest to the time of the writing of the Constitution, it was the American Dictionary of the English Language by Noah Webster. It was in 1828. And that is the best source to getting an understanding of what the words meant in the Constitution as they were written. Thomas Jefferson says, quote, "Every government denigrates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves, therefore, are its only safe depositories. And to render even them safe, their minds must be improved to a certain degree." So they have to be educated, they have to know about the Constitution, and they have to hold the rulers accountable. Because if we trust only to rulers, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
Right.
Patrick Henry, we just talked about him in the Anti-Federalist Papers, says, "Show me the age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed in the sole chance of their rulers being good men, without a consequent loss of liberty. I say the loss of that dearest privilege has ever followed with absolute certainty every such mad attempt." Tell me if this sounds familiar. Expectation that the nation will soon collapse. Worthless money is destroying our society. I mean, they don't even print it anymore, they just push a button. A very real potential of economic collapse from huge debt. People are turning to vices to forget their problems. The federal government hanging by a thread. A breakdown of law and order is turning good neighbors into enemies. Sound familiar?
Wait.
Every single one of these conditions were present at the writing of the Constitution. So everything that we've gone through before and corrected, we can correct again going back to the Constitution. So a compact, which is what the Constitution is, it's an agreement or contract between parties, a word that may be applied in a general sense to any covenant or contract between individuals, but it is more generally applied to agreements between nations and states, as treaties and confederacies. So the Constitution of the United States is a political contract between the states, a national compact, or the word is applied to the agreement of the individuals of a community. So we have a compact, which is what the Constitution is, or a contract. Rental agreements. Anybody here rented a home before?
Yeah.
Okay. There's an agreement, right? When you rent a home. Lots of fine print. There's a preamble, so it always talks about what the agreement is all about. And if we look at this, it says it's mutually agreed upon between and Northern Management, LLC, whatever, so the landlord and the tenant. So they're saying we have an agreement, and then they list what the agreement is. So that's the conditions. One of the conditions in here is no pets allowed on the premises. Even a visiting pet, prior to written approval of the landlord and a signed lease addendum pet agreement. So what we have today, we have things in the Constitution that are not allowed to happen. But you have the Republicans say, like, no pets allowed in the park. The Republicans say, well, that only means no pets unless they have a red collar. If they have a red collar, it's okay. And the Democrats say, well, no, they have to have a blue collar. So if pets have a blue collar, they're allowed. The Republicans and Democrats, they get together and they say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. So only pets with purple collars are allowed in the park. But the rule says no pets allowed.
Right.
And so these compromises that they're making are things that are not allowed to happen under the Constitution, but we continually allow our representatives to do. And finally, there's a line for signatories. So the landlord will sign and the tenants will sign, and it becomes a binding contract. So we have our Constitution in you. We, the people, created the Constitution. It wasn't a government organization. It wasn't a federal government said, okay, we're going to create this document and you states are going to listen to it. It was we, the people, got together as representatives of states and created the Constitution. There was accountability. It's a business agreement between states. So in the Constitution, we have the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. We, the people, gather together as representatives of states and created the Constitution. So in the Constitution, we have the preamble. We, the people, of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. We, the people, gather together as representatives of states and created the Constitution. So in the Constitution, we have the preamble. We, the people, of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So wait a minute, I thought the Constitution was our governing document.
Mm.
How are we forming a more perfect union? Did we have something before the Constitution?
Mhm.
We have the Articles of Confederation. So the Constitutional Convention wasn't to set out the rules, it was to amend a previous set of laws. We have the conditions. This is a one-page document showing the Constitution.
That's
Really,
the whole Constitution.
that's the whole Constitution in one page.
Mm.
Really fine print.
Was the Constitution written like as it is displayed
As,
here?
as it is displayed here on the, those are the panels,
Actual size?
actual size, that's,
Six panels.
there are 6 panels. So you have the Declaration of Independence, the 3 panels for the Constitution, or 4 panels for the Constitution, and then the last panel for the Bill of Rights.
Mm.
And the Bill of Rights has 12 amendments on it, which is different than what the Bill of Rights actually ended up being. It ended up being just 10.
Oh.
One of them got voted on and was actually the last amendment to the Constitution,
Hmm.
which was an election has to go between a congressperson's and senator's pay raise. So they can't vote themselves a pay raise. They can vote the pay raise, and then an election has to take place before the pay raise goes into effect.
Oh, gotcha.
So it took from 1791 to 1993
Oh, that's right.
for that to be ratified.
Yeah.
And then at the end you have signatories. Independence Hall, wonderful place to visit. Now, imagine spending 4 months, May to September, no air conditioning, and they shut all the doors and windows so people outside the building couldn't hear what was being discussed. Philadelphia gets temperatures up to 100 degrees or more. Humidity is somewhere around 75–80%. So not only are they debating, but they have weather to contend with, the humidity, the temperature. They're getting mean and ornery to start with. And so there were some really contentious debates that went on in this building. So we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. This is the preamble to the Constitution. It says, this is what the document does. It does all these things. Establishes a more perfect union, justice, ensures domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and that word is important, promote, not provide. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So justice, the virtue which consists in giving to everyone what is his due. Practical conformity to the laws and to principles of rectitude in the dealings of men with each other. Honesty, integrity in commerce or mutual intercourse. So justice in this consists of giving to everyone what is his due. So if you've done something wrong, what is your due? A penalty, punishment. If you're doing something right, what is your due? A reward. So establishing justice is, so if we do things right, we're going to get rewarded for it. If we do things wrong, we're going to be penalized for it. Tranquility, quietness, a calm state, freedom from disturbance or agitation. We speak of the tranquility of the public affairs, of state of the world, the tranquility of a retired life, the tranquility of mind proceeding from conscious rectitude. and promote. To forward, to advance, to contribute to the growth, enlargement, or excellence of anything valuable, or to increase of anything evil, as to promote learning, knowledge, virtue, or religion, to promote the interests of commerce or agriculture, to promote the arts, to promote civilization or refinement, to promote the propagation of the gospel, to promote vice and disorder. So promoting something is to make it bigger, make it better, more widespread, not providing for it, but make it possible. General is public, common, relating to or comprehending the whole community as the general interest or safety of a nation. So the general welfare would be the public, exempted from any unusual evil or calamity, the enjoyment of peace and prosperity, or the ordinary blessings of society and civil government applied to the states. So it's not providing for subsistence, it's giving the ability to do it in a peaceful way. James Madison, charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government. This is from the Annals of Congress, page 170, January 10th, 1794. Mr. Madison wished to relieve the sufferers, but was afraid of establishing a dangerous precedent. This was in regards to a fire in Georgetown, that a lot of people lost their homes, which might hereafter be perverted to the countenance of purposes different from those of charity. So at the time, they were wanting to pass a law to give money from the treasuries to the people that had their homes burned so they could rebuild their homes. He acknowledged for his own part that he could not undertake to lay his finger on that article of the federal Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending on objects of benevolence the money of their constituents. If only that were true today. Liberty. Civil liberty is the liberty of men in a state of society, or natural liberty, so far only abridged and restrained as is necessary and expedient for the safety and interest of the society, state, or nation. A restraint of natural liberty, not necessary or expedient for the public, is tyranny or oppression. Civil liberty is an exemption from the arbitrary will of others, which exemption is secured by established laws which restrain every man from injuring or controlling another. Hence, the restraints of law are essential to civil liberty. Can you make a law that makes you more free?
No.
No. The only way you can make yourself more free is reduce law. So the restraints of law should only be such that it gives you essential protections, but not overbearing.
It protects you from other people
Right.
trying to, in a deviant way, take away your liberty.
Correct.
Theft.
Right. Theft,
malicious
murder,
intent, murder.
yeah. All these things,
bribery.
yeah, are to protect you. And so that's why we have those laws, is for mutual protection, not for overbearing dominance. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. So that's Article 1, Section 1. If you look at your Constitution, each article will start off with the article at the top, and then section, and each section is broken down into paragraphs or clauses. So Article 1, Section 1 describes all legislative powers being granted, or herein granted, shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. So vested powers. Anybody recognize this picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ace Hardware, right?
That's my truck right there.
Is that your truck up front? Probably not, because that picture was taken long before you bought it. So, vested powers. What does vested powers mean?
People who have been given the powers that they can put on.
Okay? Recognize the vest?
Yep.
Ace Hardware. Okay? Lyle Larson owns Ace Hardware.
Yes.
What are some jobs that are done at Ace Hardware?
Cutting keys.
What's cutting keys?
Cutting keys.
Okay. Important job,
Yeah.
right? Because, you know, if you need a key. So, Lyle would take this vest and he would put it on someone and say, you are now vested with the authority to make keys. Does that change any authority that Lyle has?
No.
No, he still has the authority, but he has given that authority to someone else to act as his agent, to act for him. What are some other jobs?
Cashier.
Cashier, okay? So he can give them the vest, and they are now the cashier, so they can take money for goods and services
As a representative.
as a representative of Lyle. Does that take away any power from Lyle?
No. They're also not allowed to take money home.
But they're not allowed to take money home, no. Okay, so these vested powers are something that an individual gives to someone else to represent them. So these vested powers with regards to Congress, everything that Congress does, we ourselves can do. We give them the power to act in our name. Think about that. Do your congresspersons act as you would like them to? Do they enact laws as you would like them to?
I like our representatives.
We, for the most part, we've got
We've got good ones. Senators, on the other hand.
senators on the other hand, yes. But that is senators as well as congresspersons.
Sure, sure.
We give them the authority to represent us. Now, something else that's not thought about as a constitutional representation is our sheriff.
Mm.
Do you know the sheriff is the only constitutionally appointed law enforcement officer? Police officer, who do they represent?
The city.
The city. They don't represent me. They don't represent,
Represent a municipality.
they represent the and they
Yeah.
enforce the municipality's laws.
Mm.
Sheriff represents us.
Mm.
He enforces our rights. So that's why it's very important when it comes time for voting for a sheriff,
Mm.
you vote for a good man or woman.
Is that why the sheriff is the one that shows up at the door if you've evicted someone from your property?
Yes.
Interesting.
Because he is representing you.
Yeah,
You don't get police officers doing that
yeah.
because the police officer represents the city.
Right.
He enforces the city bylaws. He enforces the city ordinances. That's not part of the sheriff's duty. Sheriff represents us. Just something to think about.
That is.
During the constitutional debates, there was a lot of anger, a lot of, there were numerous times that it almost blew up and everybody said, that's it, we're going home. During one of these such times, Benjamin Franklin said, I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? He continued talking in that about how during the Revolutionary War in Independence Hall, they had daily prayer to have God affect the outcome. But Franklin supposedly wasn't a very religious man. And yet here in these debates, he's specifically saying God is, if we're going to rise as a nation, we need to have God with us. The debate that was going on was about how we were to be represented in government. We had the Virginia plan, Virginia being the largest state. They kind of said, well, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have a bicameral legislature, meaning there's going to be two houses, with number of representatives in each house would be elected according to population. So the House of Representatives and the Senate, they would be apportioned by population. Really great for the large states, not so great for the small states. The New Jersey plan called for a unicameral, or one house. Each state gets one vote. Really good for the small states, not so good for the large states. And so there's a lot of fight that was going on this, and we can't have this, because we're not going to have little old New York tell us in Virginia what to do.
Yeah.
And of course in New York, they're not going to say, hey, we're not going to let you big bully in Virginia tell us what to do. And so this was actually, representation was almost the downfall of the Constitutional Convention, because there was so much angst on how we were going to be represented. Both plans called for legislative, executive, and judicial branches, so there were the three branches of government that we have. It's just how they were going to be represented. Along comes the Connecticut Compromise. The House of Representatives will have its members represented according to population. So larger states will have more representation, smaller states not so much. The Senate will have its members represented by 2 delegates per state. So every state is represented equally. According to, if they're a state, they would have 2 representatives. There will also be an executive and a judicial branch. So this was really important. This compromise made it so that we could have the Constitution we have today. Article 1, Section 2, the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every 2nd year by the people of the several states, and the elector in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for the electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. So, House of Representatives, they serve for a term of 2 years, and according to how the state legislature was elected, that's how the House of Representatives body would be elected. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. They use some really confusing language.
Yeah, right.
Okay? So, you have to be 25 years old, you have to be a citizen of the United States for 7 years, and you have to live in the state which you are going to represent. So you can't live in New York and represent Virginia. You have to live in New York to represent New York. So those are the only 3 qualifications to be a representative. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. That got changed with the 15th Amendment, and we'll get into that a little bit. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island, Providence, Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3.
So Virginia was like the heavyweight.
Virginia, they determined pretty much everything. They were the heavyweight. They were the ones. If you got them all together, because I mean, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Delaware 1, Georgia 3. You know, even New York only had 6. And so we look at populations today, and it's really changed on representation. So the enumeration that they're talking about here is the census.
Right.
And so the census is really important in determining representation. Stepping back a little bit about who is counted and how they counted people. So a whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, so that's indentured servant. Okay? That's little Johnny. Comes across. And excluding Indians not taxed, so there were whole nations of Indians living within the United States at that time. They weren't counted in the population for the census count.
Unless they were taxed.
Unless they were taxed.
Yeah.
If they were living in society and taxed in society, they would be counted. If they weren't taxed in society, they weren't counted. And 3/5 of all other persons. And this is the line that everybody likes to say.
We didn't count slaves.
We count as slaves, but not as people. They're only 3/5 of a person. They're not as valuable as a white person, so they only count as 3/5 human, which is not the case at all.
Absolutely.
They were counted as 3/5 for representation and for taxes, according to the census. So representation and taxes were according to population. So if you had a more populous state, you paid more in taxes. And taxes were collected at a state level to give to the federal government. There wasn't a head tax, there wasn't an income tax, there wasn't a tax just for being. The states collected the taxes however they saw fit to give them to the federal government. So, if you up your numbers in the census so you had more representation, what else did that do? It upped how much you had to pay in taxes. If you dropped your numbers so you paid less in taxes, you also got less representation.
It's like paying for workers' comp or liability insurance. They base it on your payroll. So
Right.
the more you pay, more insurance is.
Yeah.
Less you pay, less your insurance.
Right. And so that taxes were apportioned according to the population. So you would pay a percentage of the total tax bill according to population. Edmund Randolph said representatives and taxes go hand in hand. According to the one, the other will be regulated. The number of representatives is determined by the number of inhabitants. They have nothing to do but lay taxes accordingly. More inhabitants, more taxes. Less inhabitants, less taxes. James Madison in the Federalist Papers number 54, in one respect, the establishment of a common measure for representation and taxation will have a very salutary effect, as the accuracy of the census to be obtained by the Congress will necessarily depend in considerable degree on the disposition, if not the cooperation of the states. It is of great importance that the states should feel as little bias as possible to swell or reduce their numbers. Continuing on in that, we must deny the fact that slaves are merely considered merely as property and in no respects whatever as persons. The true state of the case is that they partake of both these qualities, being considered by our laws in some respects as persons and other respects as property. So the reason they were counted as 3/5 is because they didn't have the ability to vote, they didn't have the ability to do anything with regards to government, but the representation would be 3/5 of a person. So in order for Virginia to have more representation, and this is to come up later with the abolishment of slavery, the intended purpose of it. A lot of the population in Virginia was slaves. And so next week we'll get into where there was a prohibition on ending slavery for 20 years. And the representation was to keep it so that Virginia wouldn't have as big a voice, because if they counted every person, they would have a bigger voice, and they would keep slavery, and it would be more difficult to get rid of it. But if they had a smaller representation, the other states that didn't have would have a bigger number to oppose it. So with regards to slavery, that was one of the reasons why the 3/5 clause was in there, so that eventually it could be voted out. But also, so that, and I think I've got a slide on this. Could it be reasonably expected that the southern states would concur in a system that considered their slaves in some degree as men when burdens were to be imposed, taxes, but refused to consider them in the same light when advantages were to be conferred, representation? So that's the 3/5 compromise is for taxation and representation purposes, not that the 3/5 human.
Right.
And that's where everybody goes to. They read that little line and take that little line and say, well, they're only 3/5, they're only 3/5 human. But it's for taxation purposes and representation purposes. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 4, when vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. Texas just had a vacancy.
Yeah.
They had a congressman die from COVID. So there will be an election, a special election, put out to fill that seat. It'd be given by the governor. The governor will say, we're going to have an election in this district to fill it. So that's the writ of election to fill the vacancies in the Senate, or in the House, sorry. The House of Representatives shall choose their speaker and other officers, and shall have the sole power of impeachment. How appropriate that that's coming up today.
Right.
We'll get into more of that in a sec.
All right, we're done talking. So, who's the guy, the fellow that was speaking? He's an elderly chap. And we're going to assume it was on the Senate board, on the Democrat side. Who's that guy? It's not Pelosi.
Was it the impeachment managers or?
Maybe that's.
Well, it could have been Chuck Schumer, who was the Senate Majority Leader, or
It was just, you couldn't even hardly understand him slur and he.
that would be Patrick Leahy. Patrick Leahy.
One of the senators brought in as a witness. He was trying to strike what they were putting in the articles. He wanted it gone, and this guy was not.
He's the guy that's
happening in his head for him.
He's the president of the impeachment process, right?
And
I was wondering if they had old Sleepy Joe under that mask. Did I say that? I'm sorry. I apologize.
okay, well, just hold that thought for a second. We'll get to that in just a sec. So officers of the House of Representatives, Speaker of the House. Okay, we know that. That's Nancy Pelosi. Sergeant at Arms. He's the guy that's supposed to protect the Capitol and the House of Representatives. Chief Administration Officer. Chaplain. Well, wait a minute. What about the separation of church and state?
Not in the Constitution.
Not in the Constitution. such that in the House of Representatives, chaplain is one of the officers that they have. We'll get back to impeachment because it comes around when we get to the senators, and when we get to that point, we'll go through everything. So the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof. And that got changed by the 17th Amendment, where they're directly elected by the people. For 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after they shall be assembled, in the consequences of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the 2nd year, of the 2nd class at the expiration of the 4th year, and the 3rd class at the expiration of the 6th year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every 2nd year. If vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise, during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. So that's how it was originally supposed to be done. The state legislatures appoint the senators. So the senators were to represent the states. The House of Representatives was supposed to represent the people. Now both houses represent whoever's paying for the logos on their uniform.
Yeah, right.
No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30 years and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. So a congressperson, 25, senator, 30 years old, 9 years a citizen, so 2 more years a citizen, and they have to live within the state that they're chosen. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. And they are now equally divided. It's a 50-50. The Senate shall choose their officers and also President pro tempore in the absence of the Vice President, or when he shall exercise the office of the President of the United States. So the President pro tempore is a temporary president, and I'm trying to remember who it is now. Senator Hatch, in his last term, was the Senate pro tempore president. So the Vice President just doesn't have to sit there and listen to all the debates and everything. They appoint someone else to be in charge of the gavel to make everything go. Officers of the Senate: President pro tempore, Secretary of the Senate, Sergeant at Arms, Parliamentarian, Secretary for the Majority, Secretary for the Minority. These are majority leaders and minority leaders, and a chaplain. So both the House and the Senate have a chaplain that is part of their officers of the House and Senate. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments when sitting for that purpose. They shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted shall nonetheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to the law. Okay, so back to impeachment, because that is front and present today.
So to extend further than to
Removal from office, attached to,
why are they blowing our tax dollars in right now? This is stupid.
Well, they're trying to.
Kabuki
prevent him from
political
being
theater.
able to hold office again.
Yeah,
I
that's,
know that, but
Scared to death
it's-
they'll run in
this is
4
so
years.
Right.
Stupid, it's just.
that is the sole purpose of this impeachment trial,
They're scared of it.
is to prevent him from trying to run for office again.
Gonna break down there again.
Now, there's a couple of things that are going on that make what they're doing right now unconstitutional. First of all, Chief Justice John Roberts is not presiding
Why?
because he says it's unconstitutional.
You're kidding me.
No,
I had no idea.
and that's why he's not there.
You're kidding me. I had no idea that that happened.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so Chief Justice John Roberts is not there, so that's strike one. President Trump is no longer in office, so they can't remove him from office.
Did they sign the impeachment articles while he was still in office?
No,
No, they didn't.
they never sent them over to the Senate while he was still in office. So that's why it is strike two.
Yeah.
Strike three, they have a member of the Senate who is in charge of the impeachment. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give that authority to anyone in the Senate when the president is impeached.
Is this the guy that,
That's the guy that's sleeping.
the one that's saying, they're saying Mr. President too?
Yeah,
He's like, I didn't catch his name, I can't remember his name. but
Patrick Leahy.
I caught
That's
part
what
of
it
it.
is.
Yeah,
I caught part of the,
I caught the same part you did.
yeah, he's
When Mike Lee was trying to get him to.
Yeah.
It's like,
well,
mask off or something, dude,
You-
you can't understand him.
you can't understand with his mask off. His speech is slurred, and
He's just
so
gonna slur whatever and they'll say, okay, that's
So-
what he said.
what would have made this impeachment constitutional is if Nancy Pelosi, as soon as the article of impeachment was written, took it straight to the Senate. Then the Senate could have set up a trial to take place after he was impeached, and it would have been constitutional because they could have had John Roberts there
Right.
and the whole thing to the removal part. But because of the games that were played, it makes it a moot point because he has already left office. And so the constitutionality of it is we hate Trump, so we make it constitutional. And that doesn't make it constitutional. In fact, if they do, by some weird quirk of fate, actually impeach him, President Trump would have legal standing to go to the Supreme Court and say, I was unconstitutionally, my rights were taken away from me.
Yeah, right.
And he would have his rights restored to him, and he would be able to run for office.
Yeah. So it's just a giant rigmarole.
It's-
for no
it's-
reason.
They also wanted to have him there in person to testify. The only reason to have him there in person to testify is, look at President Trump. Doesn't he look?
Yes.
It's all about looks, it's all about perceptions, it's
Well,
not
you don't
about,
look like Bernie Sanders did on the inauguration. Anyways,
So-
sorry to get you off track.
no,
It's
no.
important. It's time for that.
This, yeah, and, you know, this is something that's important. If it had been done according to the procedure set forth, then yes, it would have been constitutional. Have there been people taken their rights away to run for office again after they've left office? Yes.
Yes.
But it has never happened to a president. In fact, there's never been a president removed from office by impeachment.
Right.
What?
There has never been a president removed from office by impeachment.
Are you sure?
Yes. Richard Nixon was not removed from office. He left office.
I thought I just read a bunch of,
There are a bunch of people that have been,
maybe they were judges.
there were judges. There have been a number of judges removed from office. In fact, there was a congressperson today, Elsie Hastings, who was a federal judge who was impeached and removed from office.
Mm.
But they didn't take it to the point of not being able to hold any other office again.
And there's a transition.
But there's not been a president removed from office.
Mm.
They're all, yeah, you're right, they're all.
And Andrew Johnson, yes, I believe it was Andrew Johnson, who became president after Lincoln, was almost removed from office.
Mm.
And that's because he fired half of the cabinet.
Mm.
And by one vote, he stayed in office. And since then, there's been Richard Nixon, who was impeached but not convicted. You have Bill Clinton, who was impeached and exonerated. You have Donald Trump, who was impeached and exonerated.
No guilty, yeah.
And you have Donald Trump again, who will be impeached and exonerated. It's a foregone conclusion.
It's like a flippin' soap opera is what it is,
Well,
you know?
You
And-
said it, political theater.
it's political theater, pure and
Some
simple.
soaps they used to have on TV and everybody's just freaking out over those. And
Yeah.
everybody-
That's what is happening. It's just
Nightmare
it's
falling
a,
before our very eyes.
yeah, it's just a big soap opera, and that's why it's important to elect people that will have our interests and not their own interests.
Correct. Let it be known here today, I'm an American Christian.
Yes.
I follow the path of my Savior as an American Christian.
So Article 1, Section 4, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by rule or by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. And that changed with the 17th Amendment. So they have set the time, and the time is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So it can't be November the 1st, because there has to be a Monday first. So the earliest it can be is November the 2nd.
Okay.
And the latest it can be would be November 8th? Yes.
Yeah,
So somewhere in that time period is when
it's always gonna happen.
it's always going to happen.
Interesting.
And that's set out by law. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meeting shall be on the first Monday in December. That's changed because of the 20th Amendment to January 4th, unless it falls on a Sunday.
They're only supposed to meet once a year?
At least once a year.
At least once a year?
Yeah. And because the whole purpose of the House of Representatives and the Senate,
Pass the budget.
pass a budget.
Yeah.
Everything else is extraneous. They weren't expected to go and have all these laws and, codes and
Yeah.
everything else that goes along with it. They're expected to pass a budget and minimally pass laws, not what we have today. Each house shall be the judge of the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. But a smaller number may adjourn from day to day and may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each house may provide. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. So we just had something else happen this week that is a first. We have a member of Congress that was removed from committee assignments on a strictly partisan vote. Because she had in the past said some things that were conspiracy theorists, QAnon,
Yeah.
and all that.
A little loony.
Yeah,
Some of it.
they were loony, you know, 9/11 conspiracies and all that. They were loony. But the people of Georgia elected her.
Yeah.
The Republicans put her on those committees to represent the Republican Party. Democrats don't have the authority to do what they did.
So it's null and void.
Yeah, except it's not, because people are accepting that the Democrats can do that. What's going to come around
And what you're
is
saying-
Republicans are going to be in charge at some
Right,
point.
At some point, yeah.
Basically, what you're saying is the Constitution of the United States today means diddly.
Yes,
Diddly.
they give
They're
lip
not
service.
following.
They give lip service to
Well-
it.
No, it doesn't mean diddly.
No,
Right now, it's being applied
It's-
to them.
yeah.
In, yes, yeah. The way that they're applying it and approaching it
it's
is
not.
without any sort of reverence whatsoever.
No. They give lip service. They say, oh yeah, we're following the
But
Constitution.
it's still gonna snap back and hit them in the rear end at some point.
Well, it has during Trump's presidency. There used to be a 60 vote threshold on judges.
Mm.
But in the last year, before the Republicans took the Senate, Democrats, thinking that they were going to be in charge
Okay,
again, took that away for judges,
yeah.
because they thought they were going to be in charge of it, and they thought they were going to have a Democratic president in Hillary Clinton. And they were going to fill all the judge seats that were not filled. And it came back to bite them, because President Trump filled those with simple majorities
Mhm.
instead of the 60 vote. And so everything comes around, and so this is going to come back to bite the Democrats
Oh, no doubt.
because Republicans are going to be in charge at some point. You know, right now they have a very small majority.
Right, 14.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which in a House of 435
right.
is not a very big majority. It doesn't take much to peel people away,
Yeah, not at all.
and so it's going to come back to bite them.
No doubt.
So this is an example of the Senate exercising authority over a senator from Utah.
Mm.
Reed Smoot was elected a senator in 1903. It took until 1907 before he was seated, because he was a polygamist, even though he didn't practice polygamy. It was against church teachings at that point to practice polygamy. But because in the past they had done it, they held a trial and they said, no, you can't be seated. And there were 3,500 pages of testimony.
Isn't polygamy thought of as a religion now, not so much, oh, they're dressed weird and they marry
Yeah.
lots of wives and have tons of kids.
Yeah.
Isn't it their God-given right to practice their religion as they see fit?
That's all.
I mean, it's obviously
They're-
it's a
well-
law, it's against the law, but they don't
Yeah.
pursue that
Right.
because of religion, correct?
And there's a number of issues on polygamy. Is it hurting somebody? Is it not hurting somebody? Is it their right as a government to infringe on religion as long as nobody's being hurt? Do people have the right to choose? So there's
I tell you, I would, in this town, I don't know how others are, I would rather be a person of color than a polygamist walking down the street in this town because of how many people stare at you. If you
Yeah, I noticed
yeah,
that.
yeah, oh yeah,
Part of that
It's
is
sad, though.
is their own actions and withdrawal
Yeah.
from society and
Yep.
taking advantage of the welfare system, and I mean, there's a lot of things that have
Yeah.
gone on, but
And so,
from a constitutional
from a
standpoint,
constitutional
though,
thing,
how can you say, how can you redefine what marriage is and
Right.
not extend the definition to everybody who wants to redefine marriage?
right,
So at the end of the day, if it's a constitutional issue of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and I want to marry whomsoever I want to marry, and that's
Yes.
where the Constitution has led the justices according to their understanding of the Constitution at the time they made their decision.
here's the problem. Nowhere in the Constitution is that authority given to the federal government
On marriage.
on marriage.
But it falls under life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's the Declaration of the Independence.
Oh, okay, you're right. I always get those mixed up.
That's the lens to look at
Yeah,
for the Constitution,
Sure.
but it is not the law. And everybody and it's a common misconception.
Sure.
People say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I'm pursuing happiness, so it must be constitutional. So it's not an authority given to the federal government. It's not one of their enumerated powers. And if it's not one of their enumerated powers, then it's given to the states
Sure.
to regulate.
And like, sounds like maybe.
And so therein is the difference. As far as religion, the federal government has no authority, period, over religion unless
So far.
it is harming someone else.
Sure.
And so if people make a free choice, and that's debatable on how,
Very debatable.
on how free that choice
How that
is.
application is made,
Okay.
right?
And so there's the debate on that.
Yeah.
But if they're making a free choice, then the federal government has no authority to regulate that.
But didn't we just say that it is the government's job? I was looking under Article 1, I thought it was, but
To promote.
yeah, not the general welfare, but where's it at, man?
Domestic tranquility?
Where it talked about don't create any laws to limit people's liberty,
Yeah,
right? So wouldn't the way that the justices have defined marriage, and I'm making
yeah, no,
the argument from the contrarian perspective.
yeah.
I have my views about marriage and what the Bible says, right? But setting that aside, from a purely constitutional standpoint, did they make the right decision? Because essentially they're reducing any law that would limit the liberty of a person to marry whomsoever they desire.
they made a decision that's not within their authority to make.
I understand, but is there authority to take down any law that a state may lift up? That
No.
like abortion. It is the reason why they chose, and again, I'm not
No.
advocating for these
I understand
things
that.
on record.
It's
right?
right. And
But isn't that the argument though? That they have legalized abortion because if an abortion law limits the liberty of a person to do what they want with their body, quote unquote.
that's not how it was. It was under I think it was under the 14th or 15th Amendment. So it was an equal protection clause, which had nothing to do with abortion.
Sure.
And so,
I don't want to get sideways, but
but-
these are the questions I have when we're talking about the
So,
Constitution as a document.
the ninth and 10th Amendments are the ones to look at, because they say anything not delegated, and unfortunately they didn't use the word expressly.
Yeah, the implied powers versus the
Right.
express
Yeah.
powers.
See,
right?
in the Articles of Confederation, the word expressly was in there, and now it's kind of implied. And so
Yeah,
the problem that we have is that the federal government and the judiciary are taking authorities that are not given them by the Constitution, expressly.
Spelled out in the
Spelled out,
Constitution.
yes.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. They use the, as Glenn Beck calls it, the good and plenty clause.
Mm.
So they stretch it
Sure.
to cover whatever
Sure.
they want to do. And, you know, when we get to the Bill of Rights and the 9th and 10th Amendment, we'll discuss that a little bit
Sure.
further.
But was there an intentional elasticity in the Constitution?
No,
There wasn't.
there wasn't.
Okay.
If it wasn't given, the understanding was if it wasn't something that, and you'll find that in the Federalist Papers, if it wasn't power given to the federal government, it was to be given to the states.
Okay.
And so it wasn't, they weren't ever expanding, they weren't advocating for an ever expanding government.
There was never meant to be any sort of loopholes in the
No.
Constitution.
They wanted it to be clearly defined. Now,
Utah has their own, I mean, our state has our own constitution.
Yeah.
Which follows very closely.
it follows closely, and most states follow closely to the U.S.
Other
Constitution.
than we joined the union, and we can't separate from that union, we still have our own constitution or bylaws, if you will,
Yeah,
that we follow here. So the federal government can really necessarily come in, as long as that means anything, and say, you can't do this, you're gonna do that, and that, and that, and that, because we can say, no, we have our own constitution.
yeah.
And this
Well,
is what
and-
we're gonna follow.
Well,
But
that's
they
where
can say, all right, let's cut some federal aid from your schools.
Yeah.
Let's shape a little bit from there.
Well, and that's how they do it. They use the hook.
Oh, yeah.
They use the money hook
Yeah.
to get how the things they want. Anyways, continuing on with Reed Smoot. He served in the Senate from 1903. He was a senator. He didn't get to be in the Senate until 1907, but from 1903 to 1933.
Okay.
He was a Mormon apostle from 1900 to 1941, and that was another strike against him because he was a religious leader, and supposedly religious leaders weren't supposed to be involved in government. Boyce Penrose, senator from Pennsylvania.
I love it.
He was instrumental in getting Senator Smoot seated. He said, as for me, I would rather have seated beside me in this chamber a polygamist who doesn't polig than a monogamist who doesn't monog. And at that time, there were plenty of monogamists who were not monogging.
Right.
And therein was the hypocrisy that he was pointing out. You know, you can't be upset at the man because in his past, his religion said, but at present, doesn't.
Right.
Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time publish the same, excepting such parts as they may in their judgment require secrecy. And the yeas and nays of the members of either house on any question shall be, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. So what they're talking about here is anytime there's a vote, if you have 1/5 of the people present saying we want it recorded, then they have to record who says yes to it and who says no. Otherwise they'll have all in favor, aye, and the ayes have it, or the nays have it.
Right.
And it's interesting, they still have yay, or I should say, the yeas have it, the nays have it. They still use today that terminology, yeas and nays,
Interesting.
because one of the few things they're still following in the Constitution. So today that record, it's called a congressional record. You can go up to memory.llc.gov and you can find all of these and search them. And it's really kind of cool to look. So the original name was Annals of Congress, so from 1789 to 1824. 1824 to 1837, it was Register of Debates. Congressional Globe from 1837 to 73, and from 1873 to present, it's now Congressional Record. Anything that has been said in Congress that's been written down is in those records. Neither house during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting. So at the time that this was written, there had already been 2 places of government, New York and Philadelphia. And so they're saying you can't pick up the house and go somewhere else. You have to have all the meetings at this place, one location. And if you're going to leave for more than 3 days, you have to have the other house's approval. So if the House wants to adjourn for more than 3 days, the Senate has to okay that adjournment, and vice versa. If the Senate wants to adjourn, then the House has to okay it. The senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services, to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall in all cases, except for treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. So, if you're a senator or a congressperson, and you're going to the Senate or the House, you are privileged from arrest unless you're committing treason, a felony, or a breach of the peace. Because otherwise, one party would say, hey, arrest him,
Yeah.
so he can't vote.
So he can't vote. Right.
And so they're privileged from arrest with those exceptions. So if they commit a felony, obviously they don't have carte blanche to do whatever.
Sure.
They have to be held accountable for that. And if they commit treason, obviously they're going to need to be held accountable for that. But for anything else, you can't arrest them just because.
Right.
No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have increased during such time. And no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in that office. So, if you're a congressperson and the president wants to make you chief of staff, you have to resign your seat, and then you can become the chief of staff. You can't do both. So it's important that representatives are representatives.
Didn't we have a governor?
Yeah.
Our own governor was called to
Yeah,
by the president to do something and he had to step down.
yes.
Huntsman?
Huntsman, yes.
Yeah.
He was called to be an ambassador to China. And as an ambassador, he had to leave his governorship.
Mm-hmm.
And we have another, John Kerry. He was a senator at the time when he was called to be
The vice
Secretary of State.
president. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And Hillary Clinton was a senator when she was called to be Secretary of State. And so they had to leave their office in the Senate or in the House and to become another officer in government. So you can't have, because if you have someone voting and making the laws and someone enforcing the laws, the same person,
Yeah.
that's not good.
Right.
And so that's why they can't hold an office.
Double office.
Right. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments on other bills. So, taxes have to start in the House of Representatives because it's the people that pay the taxes. And so the representatives of the people have to say, yes, we want taxes raised. The Senate can't do that because the Senate is supposed to represent the states.
Right.
So it's the people being taxed that have to originate any bills for raising revenue. which is another reason why Obamacare was unconstitutional, because it ended up being written in the Senate first, went to the House and then back to the Senate.
Oh, interesting.
Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objection at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If after such reconsideration, 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass a bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become law. But in all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each house respectively. If any bill shall be not returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted. So, again, religious,
Yeah.
Sunday is listed as a day not counting. After it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law.
Did it die? Huh?
So, the House and the Senate can't pass a bill and then run away, so the President can't send it back, veto it and send it back to them. They have to be there to receive the veto. So this is really tough to see all in one chart.
Right.
I'll have to get, I might have to get this printed out and
Break it down even.
or break it down even. So basically what happens is you have a bill that's drafted. It advances in the House. It gets referred to committees and subcommittees. They vote on it. It goes to the full House. They vote on it. It gets reported out. And calendar, then there's debate, then there's a full vote, and it becomes an engrossed bill, and then it goes to the other House to be voted on. Same thing with the Senate. The Senate has the bill, it's listed, it gets voted on, goes to committees, then gets voted on, and continues back to the full vote. And then after they've voted on it, it goes to the President. If the President signs it, it becomes a law. If he vetoes it, then it goes back to the House that the law originated in. And if they pass it with 2/3 majority, and the other House passes it by a 2/3 majority, then they override the veto and it becomes a law. Same thing happens in state governments as well. The laws get voted on. If the governor vetoes it, then the legislature has the opportunity to overturn that veto. Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary, except on question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and House of Representatives, according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of a bill. And that is the end of our discussion tonight.
Oh, okay.
So we're 6 minutes early.
Wow.
Yay. So next week,
Even with our discussion.
even with our discussions, yes. Next week, we get into the responsibilities of Congress, what authorities they have.
Gotcha.
And it's interesting what they do that they don't have the authority to do.
Right.
Or what they don't do, that they've passed that authority on to someone else.
Mm.
For instance, federal agencies write laws now.
Yeah, bureaucracy.
So, here's a question.
Sure.
It feels to me like, you know, everybody's heard about this great reset and all that stuff, whatever, but, I just had this thought, which other people probably had, when I looked at what the president has executive powers, correct? He's vested with executive powers. And what that means, according to what I've read in here,
Mhm.
is he has power over federal government, federal agencies, correct?
Executing federal law,
Federal
Yeah.
law. Okay.
Congress makes the law,
yes,
So
the
what's,
president enforces the law, and
and
the courts,
execute.
and, yeah, it executes the law, and the courts determine whether the law is legal or not.
Right.
what would happen if the United States, as each individual state, all of a sudden became federal state, if you will? And then all of a sudden, the president has the executive power to enforce said laws, if you will. You follow me? Kind of like I'm not too far off track. Star Wars.
Okay.
You know how they want to create a new empire
Right.
and controlled by one.
Controlled by one person.
You mean to dissolve the union, essentially?
Well, the union's already there. You could just change it because we can't leave the union. We're
So-
stuck.
Well,
What-
what you're saying is it would be one
Does-
state.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I think
Now I
the point you're putting is there any recourse for executive orders?
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Trumps were challenged in the Supreme Court.
Well, even outside of that, there's still recourse outside of that.
Oh, outside of the Supreme Court?
Yes, outside of courts. Because if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void, and states have the right to not enforce executive orders. In fact, you have states currently writing law that in their state, some executive orders will not be enforced. Because, such as,
Second Amendment.
Second Amendment is a big one that they try to do through executive order. But just a simple one, transgender sports. A man on a woman's sports team. There was an executive order signed saying that has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There are states currently right now writing law that would nullify that.
I don't know that I care about all that. Only, I don't want some pedophile, if you will, in the girls' restroom when my daughter. I mean, I don't want to see that kind of stuff. There needs to be a proper place for that.
You take that aspect away from it.
Yeah, that is.
You have the just
we are brothers and sisters
Right.
after all.
yeah, but you have just the fair competition. It is not fair for a biological male to compete with a biological female.
Under the auspices.
Under
that
the
it's a
auspice.
Female competition.
It's a female competition.
It's not a
If it was
co-ed
if it was co-ed competition,
all day long.
all day long,
Yeah.
no problem.
I understand.
But biologically, males are stronger than females.
Right.
And so it is not fair for my daughter to have to compete against
In a women's only.
in a
sport.
women's only sport.
Yes. Otherwise, we make all sports co-ed.
Right.
It's
Because,
like having a Pinewood Derby and bringing in a rocket car, right?
yeah. Well, I remember, I'm old enough to remember in the 80s when there was Olympic competitions and they were actually checking for male genitalia on Russian athletes
Yes.
to see if they were actually men. They were also checking for hormone
Yep.
And we've gone from that to making that illegal. But if you're biologically a male, you can compete in female sports.
Geez, maybe that's what coach was doing to us in middle school. It's all like we'd always have a jockstrap inspection.
Now you're back to the pedophile.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But, excellent.
So
I'm not backing.
there we are. We're 8:30.
Yep.
We're done for the night.
Congressional powers next week.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
And that's an important one.